At a glance, this photo looks totally normal. However, it holds a dark secret. The man you see in the middle is John Edward Robinson. I want you to take a guess as to who the little girl in his lap is. If you have not heard of this case before, then there is a 99% chance your guess was wrong. That girl is the daughter of a woman that John murdered, and nobody was aware of this, except, of course, John himself. John Edward Robinson has many nicknames, for example, the Slave Master and the Internet's first serial killer. He is a convicted murderer and con artist who used the anonymity of the Internet to lure his victims. His crimes spanned over 2 decades, during which he manipulated, exploited, and killed several women. John was born on December 27, 1943, in Cicero, Illinois. Early on in his life, he noticed that he had a sort of charm that made others gravitate toward him. This charisma allowed him to manipulate people. In the 1960s, John began his criminal career with a series of financial crimes, including embezzlement and check forgery. These early crimes showcased his deceitfulness and ability to manipulate, both skills that would later become incredibly more dangerous in John's hands. By the 1970s, John had further established his reputation as a con artist. There was a local charity for handicapped individuals where John forged letters praising him that were supposedly sent by local dignitaries. In the mid-1980s, John began his transition from fraud to murder. After he built up enough confidence with his financial scams and such, his need for control and dominance grew. This led to him targeting vulnerable women. John typically lured them to him with the promise of money or jobs. One of John's first known victims was Paula Godfrey in 1984. At the age of 19, Paula was lured by John with the promise of a job. Paula's parents last saw her when John picked her up under the pretense of taking her to a training program. Shortly after, Paula disappeared without a trace. Her parents received a typewritten letter, supposedly from Paula, stating that she was fine and did not want to be contacted. The letter, which police believe was forged by John, delayed the investigation into her disappearance. Paula Godfrey was never seen again. In 1985, Lisa Stasi, a 19-year-old mother, met John at a women's shelter. Using the alias John Osborne, Robinson promised Lisa and her 4-month-old daughter Tiffany a fresh start. He offered her a job, a place to live, and the support she desperately needed. Shortly after moving into a hotel room that was arranged by John, Lisa and her daughter disappeared. He forged documents that led to the adoption of Tiffany. The baby was taken in by John's brother and sister-in-law. However, the couple was unaware of the disturbing circumstances that led to this adoption. Lisa Stasi's body was never found, and her case remained unsolved for many years until John's later crimes brought it to light. In 1987, Catherine Clampett, a 27-year-old woman from Texas, moved to Kansas City after John promised her an exciting job opportunity that would allow her to travel. Catherine left her young son with her parents and accepted the offer. After arriving in Kansas City, she quickly vanished. Like Paula Godfrey, her disappearance was shrouded in mystery, and John's involvement was suspected but not proven at the time. Catherine Clampett's body was never found, adding to the growing list of missing women linked to John. In the 1990s, John's criminal activities evolved again when he started to dabble in the Internet. Recognizing the potential of online chat rooms, he began using the alias Slave Master to target women interested in BDSM relationships. This new method of finding targets allowed him to exploit the broad reach the Internet provided. The following murders I'm about to go over are only some of those that John committed over the following decade or so. In 1994, Sheila Faith, a 45-year-old widow, and her 15-year-old daughter, Debbie, who had spina bifida, were lured by John. Sheila was particularly vulnerable due to her financial struggles and her daughter's medical condition. John exploited these vulnerabilities by presenting himself as a benevolent figure willing to provide the support they needed. He promised to cover Debbie's medical expenses and give Sheila a job. The two moved from California to Kansas City, where they vanished. For several years, John continued to cash Sheila's pension checks, amounting to thousands of dollars. The bodies of Sheila and Debbie were later found in chemical drums on John's property. The next woman was Izabela Lewicka, a 21-year-old Polish immigrant who moved to Kansas City in 1999 after John promised her a job and a romantic relationship. Isabella, who was involved in the BDSM community, signed a so-called slave contract that gave John complete control over her life, including her finances. This contract detailed every aspect of her life, from her daily activities to her bank accounts. Isabella disappeared later that year, and her body was found in a chemical drum on John's property in 2000. Isabella had moved from Indiana to Kansas City, believing she was entering into a consensual relationship with John. However, her trust and willingness were taken advantage of. In March 2000, Suzette Troughton, a licensed practical nurse from Michigan, moved to Kansas to travel with John as his slave. He had promised her a job caring for his elderly father, who did not exist. Suzette's mother received several letters supposedly from Suzette, but they were likely forged by John. These letters were intended to reassure her family and delay any immediate search efforts. However, several family members later shared that they found it odd that the letters contained little to no errors. Like the previous victims, Suzette's body was also found within a chemical drum in 2000. Another victim was Beverly Bonner, a prison librarian who met John while he was serving time for fraud. After his release, John persuaded Beverly to leave her husband and work for him. She disappeared in 1994, and John continued to collect her alimony checks, totaling tens of thousands of dollars. Her remains were found in a chemical drum in one of John's storage units in Missouri. John Robinson's downfall began in the late 1990s. Law enforcement finally picked up on the suspicious pattern of women disappearing after coming into contact with him. Law enforcement agencies in Kansas and Missouri began to collaborate, pooling their resources and information. In early 2000, the investigation gained significant momentum when John faced multiple allegations of misconduct. A woman filed a battery complaint against him, and another accused him of stealing her sex toys. These complaints provided the probable cause needed for search warrants. In June 2000, Robinson was arrested at his farm in Kansas. This arrest began a series of searches and discoveries that would expose the full extent of his crimes. The search of John's property led to several disturbing discoveries. Investigators found two 85-pound chemical drums containing the decomposed bodies of two women. These bodies were Suzette and Isabella, as we have already discussed. Both women had been missing for quite a while. Further searches were conducted at a storage unit rented by John in Missouri. Here, investigators discovered 3 more chemical drums, each containing a body. The victims were Beverly Bonner, Sheila Faith, and her daughter Debbie. In addition to the bodies, investigators uncovered a bunch of evidence that further implicated John in the disappearances and murders. This evidence included photographs, documents, sex toys, slave contracts, and forged letters addressed to the missing women's relatives. The photographs found on John's computer revealed his deep involvement in sadomasochistic practices. They also included images of his bound victims, which were presented in court as evidence and helped identify additional victims. John's use of the internet to find his victims was a key aspect of his criminal behavior. Investigators had to follow the digital trail he left behind, which included emails, chat room logs, and online profiles. These digital footprints provided valuable insights into how John lured his victims and maintained control over them. Investigators found numerous interactions with women in BDSM chat rooms, where John, under the alias Slave Master, would engage in conversations that often led to real-world meetings. In 2002, John Edward Robinson faced trial in Kansas for the murders of Suzette, Isabella, and Lisa, along with multiple lesser charges, including fraud and theft. The trial garnered significant media attention due to the shocking nature of the crimes and John's use of the internet to lure his victims. His case was one of the first instances where the internet played a central role in the criminal activities of a serial killer. John's defense team faced a daunting task given the overwhelming evidence against him. They argued that the searches conducted on his property were improperly executed and that the evidence was circumstantial. After months of testimony and deliberation, the jury found John Edward Robinson guilty on all counts. The prosecution sought the death penalty for Robinson, arguing that the heinous nature of his crimes warranted the maximum punishment. The judge ultimately sentenced John to death. John also received additional life sentences without the possibility of parole for his other crimes. Following his conviction and sentencing, John's legal team filed numerous appeals challenging both the verdict and the death sentence. In 2015, the Kansas Supreme Court upheld Robinson's death sentence, rejecting many of the appellate claims. However, the court did overturn 2 of his capital murder convictions and a first-degree murder conviction. Despite these reversals, John remained on death row due to the remaining convictions and his sentences in Missouri. Alan Hruby was born in 1995 into a well-known and respected family in Duncan, Oklahoma. His father, John, and his mother, Joy, also known as Tinker, were influential figures in their community due to their ownership and operation of the Marlow Review, a local newspaper. John served as the publisher, while Joy contributed significantly to its operations. Catherine Hruby was Alan's younger sister. She was a high school student who was actively involved in various school activities and was known for her vibrant and friendly personality. Catherine was popular among her peers and participated in cheerleading. Given the family's financial status, Alan had a very comfortable childhood. He had access to numerous opportunities and luxuries. He attended good schools and could travel frequently. His parents ensured that he lacked nothing, providing him with a high standard of living that included expensive clothes, electronics, and vacations. Despite these advantages, Alan developed a desire for more. From a young age, he exhibited a penchant for wealth and status. His tastes were expensive, and his spending habits soon became a cause for concern for his parents. They tried to curb his excessive spending, but this only enraged Alan. Alan attended the University of Oklahoma, where he pursued a degree in political science. His time in college was marked by irresponsible financial decisions and increasing debt. He got to the point where he resorted to deceitful means to fund his lavish lifestyle. One of the most significant incidents occurred when Alan stole his grandmother's credit card to fund a trip to Europe. He spent about $5,000 on the card. This act of fraud further highlighted his growing financial irresponsibility and decline. Alan's parents, deeply frustrated and concerned by his behavior, decided to cut him off financially. They hoped that this tough love approach would force him to take responsibility for his actions and learn to live within his means. But just like before, when they tried this, it only fueled Alan's hate and intensified his obsession with luxury. The financial cutoff imposed by his parents was a major turning point in Alan Hruby's life. Used to getting whatever he wanted, Alan found the sudden restriction unbearable. His lifestyle was no longer sustainable without his parents' financial support. This drastic change pushed Alan further into financial ruin. He was already dealing with significant debt, and the pressure of losing his status in life proved to be too much for him. Alan's response to the situation was extreme and shocking, to say the least. He came up with a plan to murder his family, believing that by doing so, He would inherit their cash and assets. It now became clear that his familial bonds meant nothing. He thought through the details, ensuring that he would be able to carry out the killings without immediate suspicion. On October 9, 2014, Alan put his plan into action. He returned to his family home in Duncan, Oklahoma, with a pistol he had stolen from his father's truck. He targeted each family member one by one. Alan's first target was his mother, Joy. Upon entering the house, Alan approached his mother. The exact circumstances of their interaction are not fully known, but what is clear is that he shot her once. The initial shot was intended to incapacitate her. After she fell, he shot her a second time to ensure she was dead. Following the murder of his mother, Alan waited for his sister, Catherine, to return home. She had just finished washing her vehicle outside. As she entered the house, unaware of the horrors that had just unfolded, Alan shot her. The final victim was John, Alan's father. John arrived home later in the day, also unaware of the events that had occurred. Alan confronted his father and, like his approach with his mother, shot him twice. The bodies of John, Joy, and Catherine Hruby lay undisturbed in the family home for 4 days. It wasn't until October 13, 2014, that their housekeeper discovered the gruesome scene. The discovery shocked the small, tight-knit community of Duncan. Authorities were contacted, and they immediately got in touch with Alan. Alan initially appeared distressed and cooperative with law enforcement. He provided an alibi, claiming that he was away from home at the time of the murders. However, his timeline quickly fell apart. Investigators found numerous inconsistencies in his statements. Surveillance footage and phone records played crucial roles in unraveling Alan's fabricated story. Alan's behavior in the aftermath of the murders further implicated him. Instead of showing genuine grief or concern, he spent the weekend in Dallas attending the Oklahoma-Texas football game. During this time, he partied with friends and maintained a facade of normalcy. His nonchalant demeanor and attempts to continue his lavish lifestyle were deeply disturbing to those who knew him and to the investigators who were beginning to piece together the truth. The photo you see on screen is one that Alan took shortly after committing the murders. As you can see in the sidebar, he had no remorse. Under intense questioning, Alan eventually confessed to the murders. He admitted to killing his family to solve his financial problems and to become the sole heir to their estate. Alan Hruby was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. His confession, along with the overwhelming evidence against him, made the case irrefutable. Alan's initial court appearances were closely watched by the media and the public. During these early proceedings, he appeared composed and largely unemotional, which further shocked those following the case. In court, Alan faced the possibility of the death penalty due to the severity and premeditated nature of the triple homicide. However, in a move that allowed him to avoid the death penalty, Alan entered a guilty plea. This plea deal resulted in him receiving 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. This outcome ensured that Alan would spend the rest of his life in prison without the chance of release. Alan Hruby had it all, but his greed consumed him, turning him into a cold-blooded killer. What makes someone cross that line? Is it pure evil or something deeper? Let's discuss below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more shocking true crime stories right here on Criminologist.